The death of Jesus, which occurred on a historic Friday, is an event that transformed the course of humanity. Jerusalem, then a scene of tension and expectation, witnessed the sacrifice that would forever change biblical teachings and biblical history. The Friday that Jesus died, now known as Good Friday, was no ordinary day, but a moment charged with profound meaning. Every detail of this date is an invitation to reflect on love and redemption, central themes in biblical accounts that continue to resonate through the ages. This day, portrayed in the four Gospels, is more than a simple historical record. It is a narrative full of symbolism and divine purpose. Biblical stories lead us to relive Jesus' final moments, highlighting the importance of his sacrifice. The story of the Bible, in recounting these events, offers us eternal lessons about courage, faith, and the transformative power of divine love. With each memory of this Friday, we are invited to delve deeper into biblical teachings, understanding the magnitude of Jesus' sacrifice. Crucifixion, one of the most brutal forms of execution in Roman times, was the method chosen for Jesus' death. This act of extreme cruelty was not just aimed at death, but at the complete humiliation of the condemned man. Biblical stories detail how Jesus, although innocent, endured this unimaginable physical and psychological torture. Nailed by the hands and feet, he suffered excruciating pain as he bore the sins of humanity. The story of the Bible leads us to reflect on the depth of this suffering and the immense love that Jesus demonstrated through his sacrifice. In addition to physical pain, Jesus' crucifixion included mockery and humiliation. The Roman soldiers, recognizing Jesus' claim as King of the Jews, placed a crown of thorns on his head and ridiculed him. This psychological suffering is an essential part of the biblical narrative, highlighting Jesus' resistance and serenity in the face of human cruelty. The biblical teachings extracted from this experience inspire us to face our adversities with courage and faith, always remembering the supreme example of Jesus. The four Gospels of the New Testament offer a detailed and harmonious account of the events that culminated in the death of Jesus. Each Gospel, with its unique perspective, contributes to a more complete understanding of Jesus' sacrifice. The biblical stories contained in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John take us through Jesus' last hours, revealing the depth of his suffering and the divine purpose of his mission. They not only chronicle events, but also capture the spiritual and emotional essence of a moment that changed biblical history. The biblical testimony is clear that Jesus' death was much more than physical martyrdom. It involved a spiritual dimension that transcends ordinary human suffering. Jesus not only endured the pain of nails and public humiliation, but he bore the weight of the world's sins. This spiritual aspect is often highlighted in the Gospels, showing that his sacrifice was an act of immeasurable love and divine redemption. The biblical teachings that emerge from these accounts invite us to reflect on the deeper meaning of their suffering. The age of Jesus, when he died, is a point of great interest and reflection in biblical stories. He is estimated to have died at around 33 years old, an age when many are just beginning to understand the depths of life. However, Jesus had already profoundly impacted the world with his biblical teachings and miracles. This short but intense life is a powerful reminder of how a brief period can be used to transform lives and leave an eternal legacy in the history of the Bible. Determining the exact year of Jesus' death is a complex task due to discrepancies in the calendar we use today. There is a calculation error in the Gregorian calendar, which implies that Jesus may have been born between 6 and 4 BC and, consequently, died between 27 and 29 AD. This difference of a few years may seem small, but it generates discussions significant among historians and theologians. What is important, however, is the impact of his life and death, which transcends any specific date, guiding us through biblical teachings and Bible history. In the quiet of Thursday night, Jesus was betrayed by one of his own disciples, Judas Iscariot. While praying in the Garden of Gethsemane, surrounded by silence and olive trees, Jesus was abruptly interrupted by soldiers who came to arrest him. Biblical stories describe this moment of betrayal and capture as a tragic turning point, where loyalty was broken and Jesus' divine mission became even clearer. The Bible teaches us, through this event, about the fragility of trust and the depth of the pain of betrayal. After arrest, Jesus was taken to the Sanhedrin, the Jewish Supreme Court, where he faced an unfair trial. Accused of blasphemy, he was convicted based on false testimony. This episode highlights how the forces of injustice can temporarily prevail, but also how divine truth and justice are inevitable. Biblical teachings show us that even in the face of false accusations and harsh judgments, the truth prevails. The history of the Bible is full of examples of how divine justice manifests itself even when human justice fails. The flogging inflicted on Jesus was one of the cruelest forms of torture known at the time. Using a scourge made of metal-tipped leather straps and sharp bones, Roman soldiers inflicted deep wounds that lacerated their skin and muscles. Biblical stories portray this scene with an intensity that makes us feel the pain and agony he endured. Every blow, every wound, was a silent testimony to the immense sacrifice that Jesus was willing to make for all humanity. The story of the Bible, through these details, reminds us of the high price of redemption. In addition to physical pain, Jesus faced intense psychological torture. The Roman soldiers, recognizing Jesus' claim as King of the Jews, cruelly ridiculed him. They dressed him in a purple robe, symbolizing royalty, only to increase the mockery. Biblical teachings show that in the midst of so much humiliation, Jesus maintained his dignity and silence. This behavior not only exemplifies spiritual resilience, but also inspires us to face our own adversities with courage and faith, as told in biblical stories. Carrying the cross was one of the most excruciating moments on Jesus' journey to Calvary. The heavy wooden beam, which weighed about 20 kilos, was placed on his already injured and bleeding shoulders. Every step he took, under the burning Jerusalem sun, was a testimony to his immense strength and determination. Biblical stories remind us of this painful path, known as Via Dolorosa, where Jesus, despite physical and emotional pain, continued steadfastly in his mission. The story of the Bible invites us to reflect on the weight of our own burdens and the strength needed to carry them. On the way to Calvary, the Bible reports that Jesus, exhausted by torture and blood loss, was unable to carry the cross alone until the end. It was then that Simão Cyreneu, a passerby, was compelled to help. This seemingly simple gesture carries a deep symbolic meaning. Simon, an ordinary man, became an integral part of this sacred story, showing that help and compassion can come at the most unexpected times. Biblical teachings encourage us to be like Simon, ready to help and carry each other's burdens, reflecting the love and solidarity present in the story of the Bible. When Jesus was fixed to the cross, each nail driven into his hands and feet symbolized a supreme sacrifice. The intense pain and bloodshed revealed the magnitude of his love for humanity. Biblical stories show us that these moments, despite being terrible, were necessary for the fulfillment of the prophecies and for the salvation of humanity. The story of the Bible invites us to contemplate the depth of this sacrifice, understanding that each wound suffered by Jesus was an act of redemption and love. The lifting of Jesus on the cross was an act that culminated in extreme public humiliation. Suspended between heaven and he became a set durch chains. Thus a interest of attention, not just as a condemned man, but as a symbol of hope and sacrifice. The plaque above his head, which identified him as King of the Jews, was an attempt to ridicule him. But it ended up affirming a profound and divine truth. Biblical teachings show us that, even in moments of humiliation, truth and dignity can prevail. The story of the Bible is rich in such paradoxes, where apparent defeat turns into spiritual victory. On the cross, Jesus experienced physical agony that is difficult to imagine. The muscle cramps were constant, causing excruciating pain that spread throughout the body. His head, crowned with thorns, throbbed with intense pain, while extreme thirst further intensified his suffering. The biblical stories tell us these details so that we can understand the extent of Jesus' sacrifice. The story of the Bible, through these descriptions, reminds us of the high price that was paid for the redemption of us all. Death by crucifixion was slow and extremely painful, often occurring from asphyxiation, hemorrhage, or a heart attack due to exhaustion. In the case of Jesus, the combination of these factors led to a death that lasted several hours from morning until afternoon. Biblical stories document this prolonged suffering, not only to record historical facts, but to emphasize Jesus' unconditional love and compassion. The story of the Bible teaches us that, through this suffering, Jesus offered the greatest proof of love and sacrifice, inviting us to reflect on the true meaning of his redemptive act. During the crucifixion, Jesus was not completely alone. At the foot of the cross, his mother Mary and other women who followed him in his ministry were present, offering silent support in the midst of pain and suffering. Biblical stories show us the devotion and courage of these women, who remained by Jesus' side until the end. The story of the Bible highlights the vital role of women, showing that their compassion and faithfulness are essential elements of the Christian narrative. This support, even in the darkest hours, teaches about the importance of presence and comfort in times of pain. At the height of his agony, Jesus was offered wine mixed with myrrh, a mixture that could alleviate some of his pain, but he refused. Later, the Roman soldiers offered him vinegar in a sponge in an act of cruel mockery. These offerings, recorded in the Gospels, remind us of the physical suffering and humiliation that Jesus faced. Biblical stories use these moments to illustrate the contrast between human cruelty and the divinity of Jesus, who even in the midst of torment maintained his dignity and purpose. The story of the Bible challenges us to consider how we respond to suffering and temptation. Jesus' words from the cross are deeply meaningful and full of wisdom, reflecting his humanity and divinity. Among the 7 phrases uttered, one of the most moving is, "Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they are doing." This plea for forgiveness, even while suffering unimaginable pain, highlights the depth of his love and compassion. Biblical stories show us that, through these words, Jesus teaches us about the power of forgiveness and the importance of seeking reconciliation, even in moments of great suffering. Another impactful phrase said by Jesus was, my God, why have you forsaken me?" This cry of despair reveals his full humanity, feeling the weight of separation from God at that critical moment. Biblical stories capture this expression of vulnerability to remind us that even the Son of God, in his divine mission, experienced feelings of abandonment and pain. The Bible story encourages us to recognize and accept our own weaknesses, knowing that even in our darkest moments, we are not alone in our struggle. During Jesus' crucifixion, the sky was covered in darkness for 3 hours, a phenomenon that left everyone around in a state of amazement and fear. This extraordinary event, recorded in biblical stories, symbolizes nature's mourning for the death of the Son of God. The sudden darkness in broad daylight was a powerful sign that something monumental was happening. The Bible story uses this event to emphasize the cosmic impact of the crucifixion, reminding us that Jesus' death was not just an earthly event, but one that reverberated throughout the universe. In addition to the darkness, there was an earthquake that shook Jerusalem at the moment Jesus expired. This earthquake was so intense that it cracked rocks and opened graves, bringing a feeling of dread and reverence among those present. Biblical stories describe this tremor as a physical testimony to the spiritual magnitude of what was occurring. The story of the Bible shows that, through this event, the material world responded to Jesus' pain and sacrifice, underlining the connection between the divine and the earthly in moments of profound significance. The exact physiological cause of Jesus' death is difficult to determine due to a combination of factors such as asphyxiation, heart attack, and hemorrhagic shock. Biblical stories describe a picture of intense and prolonged suffering, where each breath became a monumental effort. The Bible does not focus on the specific cause of death, but rather on the spiritual meaning of this sacrifice. The story of the Bible reminds us that regardless of the exact cause, what really matters is the love and redemption offered through this ultimate sacrifice. In the final moment, Jesus committed his spirit into the hands of the Father, uttering the words, "Father, into your hands I commit my spirit." This act of total surrender is one of the highest points in the biblical stories, symbolizing Jesus' complete trust in God, even at the hour of death. The story of the Bible uses this moment to teach us about the importance of faith and trust in God in every moment of our lives. This example of surrender and trust serves as a powerful reminder that we can find peace and security in our own faith. To verify Jesus' death, a Roman soldier stuck a spear into his side. This brutal act was a common method to ensure that those crucified were truly dead, thus avoiding any doubt or mistake. The biblical stories recount this moment in precise detail, underlining the certainty of Jesus' death. The story of the Bible uses this verification as irrefutable proof of the fulfillment of the sacrifice, eliminating any possibility of fraud or misunderstanding. From the wound caused by the spear, a mixture of blood and water came out, a significant detail recorded in the Gospels. This phenomenon, possibly the result of a heart rupture, was seen as a sign of his actual and complete death. Biblical stories capture this event to emphasize Jesus' humanity and divinity, symbolizing the purification and life he offered through his sacrifice. The story of the Bible uses this moment to remind us of the depth of Jesus' suffering, and the true nature of his redemptive sacrifice. After Jesus' death, his body was removed from the cross on Friday itself to be buried before the beginning of the Jewish Sabbath. Joseph of Arimathea, a discreet follower of Jesus, took the initiative to ask Pontius Pilate for permission to bury the body. Biblical stories show us that this act of courage and devotion by Joseph ensured that Jesus would have a dignified burial. The story of the Bible highlights the importance of honor and respect, even in death, reflecting biblical teachings on dignity and compassion. Unlike others condemned to crucifixion, whose bodies were often left to rot or thrown into mass graves, Jesus was buried in a new tomb. This different treatment highlights the reverence and respect that some of his closest followers had for him. Biblical stories emphasize this difference to underline the uniqueness of Jesus and the importance of his sacrifice. The story of the Bible invites us to reflect on how the treatment of the dead can reflect the honor and dignity we bestow on the living. The terrible physical suffering and agony that Jesus endured on the cross was immeasurable. Biblical stories show us that their pain was not limited to physical aspects, but also involved deep emotional and spiritual suffering. The story of the Bible highlights this experience to remind us of the depth of the sacrifice of Jesus, who endured all of this out of love for humanity. His death was more than an act of martyrdom. It was an act of redemption. Jesus' death was the fulfillment of a decree established in eternity, shedding his precious blood for all of us. Biblical stories narrate this event as the culmination of God's redemptive plan, drawn up before the creation of the world. The story of the Bible reveals to us that, through this sacrifice, Jesus opened the way to salvation for all. This act of bloodshed was not just a historical event, but the realization of God's love and grace offered to all humanity. His death and resurrection are the foundation of biblical teachings and the eternal hope that sustains the Christian faith.